The Week 3 PTS patch notes are here for update 37, and this time around they are a bit lighter than I expected. Usually Week 3 we see quite a few adjustments, and while there is certainly more here than last week, still not a ton going on, but let's go ahead and break it down. First up with Dragonknight's Chains of Devastation reduced the duration of the major Berserk granted from this ability to 4 seconds down from 10. So pretty hefty nerf here for this skill. 10 seconds was a bit long I think, but for PvE purposes, 4 seconds is super short. And stam DKs are really going to struggle to keep this up now. At 10 seconds it wasn't too bad, and sustain was pretty easy with it, but every 4 seconds, yeah, I don't know for stam DKs. I don't think that's going to work. I'm trying to think of a scenario where I'd want to use this for PvE right now, but I don't know. If I have the bar space, I'd much rather go with something like Burning Talons. Both have similar cost, and they're both on 4-second timers, but I feel like Burning Talons is just going to add more for you there. So overall, I think this will still probably be a nice ability in PvP used for burst, but if it does jump out as something significant for PvE going forward, I'll make sure to update you all. Moving on to the Helping Hands passive. This passive now requires the ability cost of what triggered it to be greater than the restored amount of stamina to prevent situations where you could gain more stamina than you had spent as magicka, but they also increased the amount of stamina restored to 1120 up from 990. Honestly, I think this is probably fair. Spamming a free ability in Ash Cloud was a bit strange of a way to be able to get stamina back. I thought Charles had a really cool idea for this. He said they should make it work for magicka too, like if you cast Stagger, you get magicka back. Right now it's only the opposite, would help stam DK out a lot, and I think that would be a pretty cool interaction. Stam DK does struggle a bit to keep up the really magicka heavy class kit, and having a tool built in with Helping Hands to not only trade magicka for stamina, but also the reverse would be really nice. I will have a full feedback video coming out really soon where I'm going to cover a lot of adjustments that I'd like to see made for combat balance. The next change is to Blood Mist. Reduce the healing of this morph to 45% of the damage done, down from 100% to ensure it is closer in power to other abilities of its ilk. This was kind of crazy that it healed for all of the damage done in an AoE. Probably still a really strong heal when facing multiple enemies, but it will be a little less overtuned when facing just one or two. They also buffed up the duration of the new Ozezan the Inferno monster mask. I guess there were issues with the visuals and also with it refreshing properly at exactly 1 second, so this makes it a bit more reliable to get good uptimes with. And then Mara's Balm got a 33% nerf on the healing. They reduced it to 1106, down from 1675. This one has been really good in PvP, and I'll admit I'm out of the loop on that side of things, but let me know what you all think about this change. I think at first glance at least, it still seems like it's going to be a pretty good set. All right, next up is a change to the new set, Snake in the Stars. This set now lasts 4 seconds, down from 6, so only 33% uptime instead of 50% now. The damage event can now occur once every 100 milliseconds, down from once every second. Reduce the damage per hit to 1170, down from 2848. This set now has an additional cooldown per target of 12 seconds in addition to its 12-second trigger cooldown in order to prevent subsequent applications, and this set now also grants an additional line of magicka recovery on the 5-piece bonus. So I'll read their developer comment here. This set was designed to counter pesky heal stacking for periods of time to help create windows of opportunity to cut foes down to size, and the current iteration is missing the mark while simultaneously feeling oppressive for anyone it was applied to. We're lowering the uptime and ensuring you can't chain cast it between multiple set wearers on a single target, and reducing its damage per hit, but increasing the number of times it can trigger while it's active. These changes should help reinforce the set's goal while pulling back from its power against other builds. We're also taking some of the power out of the proc itself and putting it more into the passive bonus that helps keep you in the fight. So we'll see how this goes, with it being able to tick now on 0.1 second intervals instead of just every 1 second. For that 4-second period that this is active, if someone does have a bunch of heals stacked on them, they will potentially take far more damage from this set than in the previous iteration, even though the damage per tick is down a fair bit. But for someone that is only really healing themselves, I don't think this will do that much damage against them. So it seems like the goal is to be able to take out someone that has a bunch of heals stacked on them. But again, let me know what you all think about this one. I'm trying to wrap my head around it, see if this could actually counter that sort of situation, but I'll be interested to see how this one plays out. Then we had a few changes to the new dungeons coming, but most of those were visual or just bug fixes or text adjustments. The only significant change I saw to the mechanics is with the first boss in Balsanar. There is a heal check mechanic where you get an AoE on you that deals a ton of damage. This was purgeable before and pretty much negated the mechanic altogether, so now you will actually have to deal with that. It is a pretty interesting mechanic. It seemed like right after that went out, there would be another mechanic that would often force the group to move around a bit. So it could be an interesting one to try to counteract. It might be one of those situations where everyone having a self-heal on ends up being the play. And then finally, I want to talk about Major Berserk for 5 seconds on Wrecking Blow. That wasn't in this week's patch notes, but I think a lot of people were wondering if it would be adjusted. And it looks like so far it is still going to go through as is. This makes Wrecking Blow and using a two-hander on your front bar a really strong option for single target damage. There are already quite a few trial dummy parsers on YouTube using it, and while it is really nice for that single target damage, I don't think it's so far ahead that it invalidates other options. And I think for AoE encounters, you're still likely going to want the stats that you'd get from using dual wield paired with a more AoE focused spammable. Now this has brought up some discussion around the Blackrose Prison two-handed set Radial Uppercut. This set adds 1190 penetration, and then Uppercut deals 45% of its damage to all enemies near your primary target. Now I wish the tooltip was a bit more specific here, but after some testing, it looks like it is a 5-meter radius for the splash damage. So thank you, Nalandia, for looking into that. There has been some speculation about this maybe finding its way into the meta, and it is certainly better than it was considering that Major Berserk was added to the skill that this affects. I do see a couple of issues with it though. First is that 45% number. So Wrecking Blow has a base tooltip of 2760. This is one of the hardest hitting spammables in the game, tied with the Templar's Puncturing Sweep and Biting Jabs, and just behind the dual wield spammable Flurry. So if you take 45% of that 2760, that gives you 1242 for the AoE portion of the Blackrose two-hander. Now, if we compare this to a traditional AoE spammable like Carve or Brawler or Whirling Blades, those are between 1742 and 1799 for their base tooltips. So with the Blackrose Prison two-handed splash damage, we're sitting at about 70% of what you'd get from casting one of those traditional AoE spammables. But if you look at a skill like Biting Jabs from the Templar, the AoE portion of that is equal to those AoE spammables. So Biting Jabs has the single target component of Wrecking Blow and the AoE component of a Carve or Brawler all built into one skill. So essentially the Blackrose two-hander gives you a worse version of Biting Jabs. Now that 10% Major Berserk is there with Wrecking Blow though, so that can't be overlooked, but that is there with or without using the Blackrose two-hander. So another issue I'm seeing with this set is that if the secondary targets in a fight are important enough to focus, I feel like I'd rather use a different setup that is more AoE heavy than relying on the 45% splash from Wrecking Blow. And if the secondary adds are not that important, then they're probably going to die to cleave anyways, and I don't need to mess with giving up a 2-piece bonus to take care of that. Now maybe there is a sweet spot in between on some encounters that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, where the ads are a bit too pesky to ignore, but you'd really prefer to focus on the main boss the whole time, or maybe the main ad in a trash pack. I could possibly see this being used in a scenario like that, but even then that 5-meter radius also comes into play, which is a bit smaller than a typical AoE cleave, so you need to make sure that the stacks are close enough to allow for that splash damage to even happen. Another possibility for this set, I could see it maybe being interesting for someone who just wants to run through dungeons and not swap to different setups for different encounters. You could just spam Wrecking Blow through the whole thing, and your trash DPS would be a little bit lower than if you did a more traditional AoE setup, and your boss DPS would also be a bit lower than if you just didn't have the Blackrose two-hander equipped and did something more single target focused instead. But I feel like it would be an okay middle ground where you'd have okay trash damage and okay boss damage all packed into one setup, and maybe also knights on certain bosses that do have those annoying secondary targets to deal with. But mostly as I'm going through this, as I'm talking through it, I'm trying to figure it out myself as well. Often these things just take time to wrap your head around. It isn't uncommon for a couple of months into a patch for something new to catch on that people had just overlooked. With a game like ESO that has as many moving parts as it does, it's nearly impossible to figure it all out, and sometimes it just takes sitting with it for a while. So I fully admit that I could be wrong about this set. Maybe it has some really good uses that I'm not considering. I just don't know if there are many situations where I'd want to give up a 2-piece bonus to gain some mediocre splash damage. Personally, I'd just rather see the Blackrose two-handed set go in a different direction. We already have Titanic Cleave, which is fantastic for AoE damage. Let me know what you guys think. Maybe there is some situation I'm overlooking with this set. But that's pretty much it for the week 3 patch notes. I do have a number of videos in the works right now. I spent most of last week doing a bunch of testing and research on a variety of topics, so that's what I'll be working on right now, and hopefully getting out several videos over the course of the next couple of weeks. Thank you all for watching, and a shout out to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members. The contributions help a ton to keep the website and channel going. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Cougar is Bay in the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, Iffy, Blake1816, Mordecai1212, Santanico, Vidridi, Florian, Phoenix, Nalandia, Unemployed, Chryseliana, Cha-Cha, and Technical KO. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.